Good night, everyone. Hello, my name is Lisa Black, and I am one of the Rogue Women Writers. We are a group of 6 thriller writers whose backgrounds range from former intelligence officer to journalism to White House strategist. To let you know how this is going to go, for you participants in the Zoom room, you'll be in the galley during the reading. We encourage you to introduce yourself by typing your name, any contact information in the chat bar. For those of you joining, hopefully at some point on Facebook Live, please comment if you have anything you'd like to tell the authors, and especially if you have any questions you'd like to ask. The comments will be monitored and relayed to the authors in real time. The authors will be reading only briefly, so we'll have plenty of time for questions and answers. All of the books discussed here tonight should be available through your local bookstore. Let's all use the hashtags Rogue Reads and hashtag Rogue Women Writers as we post about our experiences tonight. And as I said, my name is Lisa Black. I'm the author of 15 novels featuring forensic specialists, which also happens to be my day job. I am based here in Florida, where it's been raining for like the past 36 or so hours, has finally stopped, which I am thrilled to be emceeing this event. So without further ado, let's introduce you to these amazingly talented authors. Rob Poby is either living at his place on a beach or up in the mountains at his cabin, where there is no telephone, internet, or television. Even when he has internet access, he does not do social media, though he is learning to tolerate email. His grandfather was a professional artist, and Rob spent many years as an antique dealer. His character, Lucas Page, is an astrophysicist, a university professor, a father, a mathematical savant, and misanthrope. In Under Pressure, a tech gala at the Guggenheim is bombed. Page agrees to help the FBI with the investigation, provided he can avoid all the other agents. Rob unwinds with a whiskey sour made with whiskey or scotch. So Rob, tell us all about yourself and your character, Lucas.
All about myself. I'll start with how I came to writing. It's actually a pretty interesting story. I had a very, very tough year where 5 people that I cared about a lot died, basically one after the other. My best friend died in August. Then I ended up losing my mentor in November. March, an employee who helped me build my business, died of lung cancer. Then I had another friend who died of a cocaine-induced heart attack. And then a lifelong friend was murdered. And I was the last friend to see him alive. And the next day, when I had my antique shop, I stood in front of the store with the key in my hand. And I'd been writing for 15 years at that point. I just hadn't been showing my work to anybody. I'd been writing novels and sticking them in a drawer. And I decided at that point, if I didn't give this a shot, I would just be one of those guys, I would die and my relatives would be, putting all my work in a big dumpster someday. So I thought I'd give it a shot. And that's how I got from A to, B. And it's been a 10-year trek since then. And basically here we are. So Lucas Page, I guess. Do we talk about Lucas Page? I don't know, what's the format here? How should I go forward? You're emceeing. Should I just discuss the character or whatever works?
Whatever you want to tell us something about Lucas and about this particular book.
Lucas came about, I was watching a documentary on Ruby Ridge, and Lucas just came out of this sort of the Second Amendment's argument in the United States tends to have back and forth. He's a guy that can carry conflicting views in his head at the same time, but he's always on one side of the fence with in the way he acts. And Lucas was born out of that, and he's become, I'm not going to say an antidote, but I like him because he's a fun guy to spend time with for me. He makes me think, he makes me flex my brain a little bit more. So hopefully he makes the readers flex their brains a little bit more. That's what I wanted to come up with a character that saw the world from a different perspective. He refuses to carry a gun. He doesn't drink at all. Milk is or coffee is his favorite drink. He has 5 adopted children. He doesn't do painkillers. He's not, this grouchy guy that, shoots people all the time or punches them in the face. He's really kind of an unlikely hero for this kind of a story or this kind of the settings that I put him in. And so he kind of popped out of that, and he's a lot of fun for me to spend time with. The readers seem to like him, but the important part for me, it's like Maslow's theory of needs or hierarchy of needs. You need certain things. I need to have a character that I want to spend. Well, we're all writers. We all know that. Nobody wants to spend time with a character that they're not interested in. So that's 90% of the job is having somebody that you want to spend time with, which as you all know.
Okay. So how badly do you damage the Guggenheim?
The Guggenheim actually makes it through pretty okay. The people inside aren't as fortunate. They're kind of like shrimps in a pressure cooker. And
Ooh.
yeah, it's a thermobaric explosion that basically cooks them from the outside in and the inside out at the same time. So it's an anti-personnel device that takes them out. But Lucas isn't sure if it's a financial crime. The way I try to work a book is that you're not really sure what direction things are going in or where the bad guys are going to come from at the end. That Thomas Harris, that 180 that he likes to pull in his writing. I try to do that a few times in a book too. So you think you're going here and you're going there, and vice versa. So, and that's Lucas, and that's under pressure in a nutshell, I guess.
Can you read some of the book to us? You got a few pages picked out?
I don't have a few pages picked out. No, I apologize. I didn't realize you'd be reading. I'm terrible at class exercises. Just getting me in here, I apologize for all those emails and not answering when I was supposed to and not being here half the time. This is really, I'm a seat of the pants type person.
I think we were just lucky to get him to come.
Yes, apparently. I do have a few questions for you, though.
Okay, perfect.
How did you come to own Roberto Calvi's desk? And tell us who exactly Roberto Calvi is.
Roberto Calvi he's known, his nickname is God's Banker. I forget the year, the mid 80s, I think it was. He absconded with $404 million from the Vatican. He was the Vatican accountant. And they found him 3 days later hanging under Blackfriars Bridge in London with his pockets full of bricks, about $50,000 in cash. And it was deemed a suicide for, I think, 15 years. Till the family was eventually got it overturned because there was a fight with the insurance company because they had a large insurance policy. And I got the desk through the family. It's just something that happened along the way. And when I was in Antique, it was just one of those situations that came up, and I met people in the family, and one thing led to another. And so now I sit at Roberto's desk every day, and I get to write. It's kind of a surreal experience.
Yeah, I'd say. So other than him, have you ever handled an antique with a history of murder?
History of murder. That's a good question. I bought a desk with a sawed-off shotgun in it, mounted underneath on a stool.
Okay.
Somebody
I don't know.
This is great.
Whose phone is?
Wrong channel. Wrong channel.
Or not. It depends. Who knows?
Right. That's a little interstitial there.
Yeah. It wasn't me this time, I swear. So back to the antique with the history of murder.
Yeah, so nothing with a lot with an antique history. I own a pair of lamps that belonged to Harry Houdini for a little while. He'd actually put a deposit on them when he was in Montreal the last time he was here. And I bought them from the family of I guess they're the grandchildren of the antique dealer who kept them for years. He had the deposit slip and the Houdini signature and everything. I have all the documentation somewhere, so I've got that. And I guess those are the only two, unusual things that I have. I mean, if things could speak, think of all the used books you picked up in your lifetime. Say, who's handled this? The 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. I'm always amazed by objects. Or I'll be watching a film and say, hey, is that something that I owned? Or, so I'm curious about that all the time.
Okay, one more question. Since your character's an FBI agent, how did you research that role? Do you just wing it? Did you spend time at the FBI? Did you, do you have friends who are FBI agents?
Good question. I first draft, I wing everything. I just make everything up as close to what I think will approximate, actual procedure. I have some, I'm not gonna say friends. I have 2 acquaintances in the FBI that will answer questions for me. I've got one. That helps a lot. I've got one friend in the New York Police Department. He's a retired detective. He helps me an awful lot with details. And because the setting is New York, I spent a lot of time in New York. My folks had an apartment there for 23 years when I was growing up. So I've had 3 cars stolen in New York, and a lot of things happen. So I know that helps a lot too. So it's kind of a combination. Plus, if I ever have I pick up the phone and I'll call somebody like you one time, if I need, how does Curari work or something.
Yeah, it's always good to have a team of, people you can call on to ask questions.
Yeah, I don't wing it generally. Like if I say a car, the car that killed her weighed 3,409 pounds, it's because I look it up and make sure that the car weighed 3,409 pounds.
Oh, me too.
It must drive you crazy. Why? I can't picture somebody like you watching even something like NCIS, where I know they do their research. They mispronounce things all the time, and
yeah.
That's, oh, look, we have his DNA in 45 seconds. It doesn't work that way. So that's the kind of thing that drives me bananas, you know? So I try not to do that in my work.
Yep. I know what you mean. Okay, well, that was very interesting.
Or not, I apologize.
No. That was pretty darn cool. Your book sounds fascinating. I have to get that now. We're going to move on to, and we'll probably have more questions and answers will come in at the end. But we're going to move on now to Robert Desidario. Robert, you need to unmute there. Is from New York City and spent many years as an actor before discovering the fun of writing. He now splits time between New York and LA with his wife, actress Judith Light. Many novelists find that making the jump from novels to screenplays is more difficult than they expect. And Robert had the same experience in reverse. Accustomed to writing screenplays, a novel was a new challenge. But he found himself with a question that he had to answer. What if the war on terror came to an end because the leader of ISIS had a mystical experience? His protagonist is a girl after my own heart who likes to drink. Her drink of choice is a vodka tonic in a martini glass.
You've got them all there.
So Robert, tell us about The Occurrence.
The Occurrence. Well, it started out with that thought. Well, I haven't had any personal experiences with reincarnation and past lives. I am fascinated by that world. And that was the core component of what helped me put the story together. Because with this mystical experience that starts out the novel, the characters, of which there are a number of them, I think there are like 11 or 12 main characters. They all find out that they are connected in some way, not just in this lifetime, but in the past. So while it falls into the political thriller genre, it's really, its heart beats in the metaphysics of how we're all connected. And that's a lot of the drive. It started out as a pilot for a TV series. And a couple of more characters started to appear. So I said, oh, maybe it's a feature film. We could do a 2-hour and maybe use it as a backdoor pilot. If that does well on TV, then we can expand it into a regular series. But as I kept writing it, more characters appeared. And ultimately, I came to the conclusion that this is a novel, and I'd never written one of those before. So it was very daunting. Writing a screenplay is doing a marathon, and writing a novel is a triathlon for me. I took classes online at UCLA. There's a wonderful organization out in California called Author Accelerator. And I hired a bunch of editors along the way that I would give pages to every week. Dawn Ios is the latest one, and she's working with me now on my second novel, which is a total departure from The Occurrence, but does deal with reincarnation and past lives. Then writing a novel is daunting, but it's also an exhilarating experience. Writing screenplays, you're very much, you're an important cog in a wheel, but you are one of a number of people who have a say over the vision of the story, which is terrific in its way. Writing a novel, even though there are people you invite in to help you and edit and kind of give feedback along the way, it starts out as your vision, and so far in my experience, it ends up as your vision in a way that maybe you weren't expecting because of the input that you've gotten along the way. But it's a very powerful experience because it is you. You are the writer, you're the director, you're all the actors, you're the cinematographer, you're the wardrobe person. You are everything. You know, a lot of the novels so far have a very a filmic quality. I find that I have a tendency to write chapters that are shorter, so they feel like they are scenes that move the story forward. And I'm always in admiration of people who can write books that are 400 or 500 pages long with, you know, with pages that go on without any break in anything. So that's something that I don't know that I'm built for. And if it happens along the way, I'd be happy to take that into my experience as a writer. But right now, that's basically how I approach it. I'm at my desk now. This is where I write every day. And I do write every day. That's very important for me. And that's basically it in terms of my journey from where I was as an actor for 40, 50 years of my life. I've been writing about maybe 20, 25 years, and only 3 or 4 as a novelist. So I'm still very much in the beginning process of it all, and happy to have had this book come out.
Well, I'm about a quarter of the way through it, and I can see the screenplay influence because it's happening. Everything happens so fast. It moves. I mean, there's no long periods of exposition or anything. It's like moves like super quick. So I can picture what it would be like on screen.
Yeah, I was very. It was very helpful when I heard the term info dump.
Yes.
So I learned to avoid info dumps, which are having too much exposition in one place at one time.
Right. Yeah, that's my downfall.
That helped me edit the book down to what you see now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So do you want to read some?
Yeah, I'd love to. Read the page and a half from the very beginning. This is chapter 1, Wednesday, September 9. The desert wasn't the only vast space of loneliness Dominique Vallon had traveled. There was the space inside her, the longing to fill the emptiness she had as far back as she could remember. She knew there was more than her insular and hyper-focused world, but she could never shake, and never wanted to shake, the pull of foreign lands and their danger. She knew she was addicted to the adrenaline rush of being close to death. She also knew she was running away from something, from the truth of who she was. For she could never shake the opposite experience either, where she'd imagined herself belonging to a tribe. She dreamed of living among nomads in deserts with the abilities to heal. It was a rich fantasy life. And while she believed it was a child's fantasy, she believed there was a deeper truth in it. That's why she was here for almost 2 years now, sitting in her usual place in the metal shuttered windows inside the never closed American bar in the green zone, Missoula Rock, waiting to make her next move, either toward death or a healing to end the loneliness. That's when the scent of roses drifted in with the morning sun and shocked her from her reverie. Dominique first smelled roses that weren't there when she was a child. Tuberculosis had brought her close to death when she was 3 years old in Pittsburgh. But she knew her soul wasn't ready to leave and knew she would survive because she smelled roses. Dominique knew the scent of roses was the presence of God, for whenever she'd been in danger, it had come to her, and she knew she'd be protected. It was something she never told anyone because she believed she didn't deserve it. That the roses came to her now deepened her awareness and heightened the buzz that danger was closer than it had been since she first set foot in this land. It also reminded her that what almost had taken her life as a child had branded her with wanderlust and daring, and birthed in her the courage to use her pen as a fearless sword to speak truth to power. That was a confidence hard to shake. So was the fact that she believed she was a fraud. But now at 33, and as comfortable on a fashion runway as in a foxhole, she was one of the most magnetic and respected journalists in the world, so she must have been doing something right all these years. Her life had been a pinball machine blasting from one corner of the world and her mind to the other. Writing and alcohol helped ease the paradox and the pain. She just sent her latest piece to the Washington Post and ordered a vodka tonic and a martini glass to celebrate. She knew the American military didn't appreciate getting raped over her Pulitzer Prize journalistic coals, but that never stopped her from telling the truth. Those coals also inflamed the White House when she began reporting they needed to take ISIS' new leader, Abd al-Hashim, as serious as fucking plague. His education and innate acumen to manipulate people in situations was just the tip of his violent extremism. They made the same miscalculation with bin Laden in the beginning, funding him against the Russians, thinking they could control him. Did they want to lose the war and their soul with this guy? She leaned her elbows on the table, the bartender mixing her drink, just as Julian Ledge pushed open the steel bar doors. He strode toward her past the white plastic tables filled with green zone archetypes, broad-shouldered security contractors with dates in tight tops and high heels. a handful of diplomats in blazers, a construction worker wearing a fishing vest that read Baghdadi. Julian's rough, handsome face lit with an infectious smile when he saw Dominique. But she knew the ravages of battle had scarred him and coarsened the heart, struggling to reach out. Still, she had affection for him. Affection she never could articulate from her isolated realm. But she trembled with the thought that those walls were about to come down.
Oh, very good.
Thanks.
That's definitely intriguing. Well, I have a question if nobody else does, but it's totally off the topic. Your first job was as a DJ, and you love music. So I have to ask, have you ever been in a musical?
I did in college. I did Guys and Dolls.
And who were you?
I was Rusty, one of the three guys who did the trumpet thing in the beginning. I mean, this is back in the 70s. I don't remember, but I was Rusty something. Rusty, the guy who talked like this.
Oh.
And then I did an experimental piece called The Pippic Proposal at the Village Gate in the Village in New York City. I don't think other musicals, no, I haven't done any other musicals. I was mostly just wanting to do, straight dramatic acting. I didn't do musicals on the radio, but I did a lot of short stories. I read, what is now called a podcast. I was basically doing that on rock and roll radio. I worked in Boston from 10 at night to 2 in the morning, and at midnight, the rock and roll stopped, and I would take the works of Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, the guy Richard Matheson, and I would break them up into 4 installments. And I knew a lot of the record company guys, so they would give me albums that were Terry Riley, Morton Zabotnik, just sides of albums that they played experimental music. And I would have them, I'd have them playing on the turntable as I would read 20 minutes of a story. And because Boston was such a student town, my ratings at midnight to 1 were as high as drive time.
Wow.
The kids are all up stoned listening to these stories. So.
Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Did you have a past life experience that drove you to write this book? Did you experience that near-death kind of past life?
No, I haven't had any personal experiences with that. I don't know where the idea came from. I was looking at, the news and, the question, what would happen to end the war on terror? You could use that question today. What would happen to end the division in America? And nothing had been materializing. And I thought, you know what? We would need help from some other side. I think that would be a way to make that happen because it's not happening on our own. And then I kind of just, extrapolated that and said, oh, if we had, if Osama bin Laden or someone in that position had an experience and he realized jihad was wrong and he said, you know what, I've been misled, I've been misleading people. And he winds up surrendering to the FBI. That's the turning point in the book. But no, I'm fascinated by it. And it's such a rich world. Rob, when you were talking about the connections, I feel related to that. Well, I think everybody is connected. One of the characters in the book, who's from Cusco, Peru, she is the one who keeps saying we are one. She says it in Spanish, she says it in English, and that is another theme that runs through the book. I do believe that. I do believe that we are all one. It's just hard to see it in the world today, especially, but I think we're striving for that. So I think that sort of has been my path to using past lives and reincarnation, because you can go anywhere with that, and it's just a rich field for me.
Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to Lynn. Lynn Constantine. You know Lynn as one half of the writing team, Liv Constantine, as a former business exec who loves to scuba dive, but she also writes under L.C. Shaw. Her book, The Network, introduced us to Jack Logan, former bodyguard turned reporter, who stumbles onto an organization dedicated to unleashing unspeakable evils into the planet. Since I just finished reading it, I'm dying to know what happens in the just released sequel, The Silent Conspiracy. Lynn's snack of choice is veggie straws. I love these things. I can eat the whole bag like really super easily. So Lynn, tell us about The Silent Conspiracy. But you got to unmute.
Unmute myself. There we go.
Yeah.
All right. So The Silent Conspiracy picks up pretty much where the network left off with Jack and Taylor, who are investigative journalists, and they find themselves, they think that everything is back to normal, and they find themselves embroiled each in a different story. Jack is following a series of bizarre murder-suicides that are occurring among seemingly normal citizens, while Taylor is pursuing a story of a group that has come together and has a Supreme Court case against a national health insurance company. And as the book goes on, they begin to suspect that the two stories are connected, or that there are people, power players, that are involved in both sides of the stories, and it kind of takes off from there.
Okay. So can you read some of it to us?
I can. You're eating those veggie sticks. I don't have,
Yeah.
should have some of them with me, I know. Okay, so I'm just going to read from the first chapter from The Silent Conspiracy. The darkness was there before Maggie Russell was aware of it, the gentle May breeze whispering evil in her ear. When she arrived at the field, she was still in a good mood, eager to cheer on her son and his team during the last Little League game of the season, and she took a seat next to her friend at the top of the bleachers, where she had a good view of the entire field. It was cool for a spring day in Baltimore, and she slipped her arms into her pink cardigan and pulled it tightly around her. Maggie generally found baseball boring, but she got a kick out of watching her 9-year-old son, Lucas, his face scrunched up in concentration as he tried to make the bat connect with the ball. And she faithfully attended all his games. But today he hadn't been played yet, and her mind started to drift to the long list of things she still needed to accomplish over the weekend. Sorry about that. She turned to her friend Agatha, whose son Philip was pitching, watching as she carefully quartered apples and oranges on a cutting board resting on her legs. She was getting restless now and glanced at the scoreboard again. Only one more inning to go, and they were still tied up. She caught sight of Lucas sitting on the bench and felt a slow burn begin. The new coach hadn't played him at all. Her son was looking at the ground, his shoulders slouched, looking as if he might cry, and Maggie began to get angry. What's up with this guy? Isn't he supposed to play all the kids? Aggie gave Maggie a sympathetic look. I think so, honey, but this game will determine if they go on to the playoffs. Try not to get upset. That was easy for Agatha to say. Philip was always put in first. She couldn't just sit here and do nothing. Almost without being conscious of it, she sprang up and yelled out to the coach. Everyone's supposed to get a turn. The coach ignored her, but she received plenty of dirty looks from the other parents. Agatha put her hand on Maggie's arm and whispered, Honey, try to calm down. Maggie pulled free and was about to answer her when a dad sitting in front of her turned around and shook his head. It's tied up. If we want to win, we have to play our best. He looked disgusted as he turned his gaze back to the field. 3 big fat words rose from his head. You stupid bitch. Maggie could see his thoughts as clear as day. Her temples began to throb, and she suppressed the desire to grab him and tell him to shut up. How dare he use that kind of language with her? Suddenly, she had the urge to push him off the bleachers and watch his head crack open on the cement below. She wanted to put her hands around his neck and squeeze until he couldn't speak, and watch the breath drain from him so he could never talk to anyone like that ever again. But instead, she rose from her seat again. Agatha tried to get her to sit down. Maggie, it's just a game. Sweetie, you're making a scene. She pushed Agatha hard. Leave me alone. Coach, coach, she yelled again, louder this time. Coach looked up at her and threw his arms up in exasperation. Put Lucas in the game now. I didn't come here to watch him warm a bench. The coach strode over and whispered something to the umpire, who was now walking toward the stands. Maggie wasn't going to let the coach ignore her or send his lackey to placate her. She began to march down the bleachers toward the field, then stopped as both her arms began to itch with an intensity she couldn't ignore. She glanced down to see a swarm of angry bugs biting her. She tried to push them off her skin, but they wouldn't budge. Get off me, she shrieked. A dull roar in her ears began to grow, like the sound of crashing waves getting closer. Heat worked its way up her chest again until she felt like she was on fire. She turned back to Agatha, grabbed the knife out of her friend's hand, and started stabbing at the bug, so she kept missing and piercing her skin instead. She ran straight down the bleachers as the other onlookers moved out of her way. Once she reached the field, she stood in front of the coach, who was looking at her with hatred. It was obvious that he was out to get her and her son, and had been from day one. Maggie felt as though she'd been infused with the super strength as she plunged the knife deep into his chest over and over, and the blood began to pour out of him. That would show him. She felt hands pulling at her, but they weren't strong enough to stop her. When he slid down to the ground, his body still, she suddenly felt cold. What had just happened? The roar was gone, and in its place, she heard the screams of people around her. Lucas was yelling, trying to get to her as a sea of arms held him back. "Mom, Mom!" "I'm sorry," she called to him, tears streaming down her face. What had she done? She looked down again at the man on the ground. A loud voice boomed from the sky. "Look what you've done. The only remedy for this evil is to turn the knife on yourself." Yes, she realized that was only fair. Maggie looked at the bloody knife still clutched in her hand. One swift slice to the jugular was all it would take. Before she could change her mind, she raised her hand to her neck and cut. The last thing she saw before she lost consciousness was her son's heartbroken face.
Whoa, that was intense.
Yes, I know. I know. Yeah.
So were you
Wait,
inspired?
is that the beginning?
That's the beginning. That's the opening. Yes, I was inspired by my own little league games that I had nothing to do
I
with
was
that.
thinking, I was wondering, yeah.
And
No, I wanted to. This is an example. Obviously she's gone and she's not. She doesn't have any more point of view on the story. But there are similar type of incidents that occur in the book where people just normal, good people go crazy. And I was trying to figure out the best way to relay that without having it be in a passive way, which I would have had to do it either from Jack or Taylor watching the news. And so I wanted the reader to kind of be able to be in the skin of somebody who was experiencing one of these episodes. And that's why I decided to open with this character. I mean, I typically wouldn't write a character that's going to die in chapter 1. And that's the only victim or whatever, perpetrator of that kind of thing that you actually get a point of view look into in the book. But I just thought that would be kind of a good way to kick things off and get it started. So, and anybody squeamish would probably, after that chapter, just, not continue with the book. So way to separate it out.
Well, from reading the network, I found it very interesting about marketing and how things are presented and how easy it is really to manipulate people. And since you have a background in marketing, you probably know all about that. Can you give us like the most egregious examples you can think of just blatant out and out manipulation by marketing, or what was surprising in that field?
Well, I worked for a long time in credit card marketing. So my job was to do in direct mail marketing, back before email became a thing. And so my job was to try to get people to rack up their credit card bills using, checks to do for home improvements or to do different things in their houses. And, so you're sending all of these upbeat things like this is going to improve your life. Well, really, that you're charging horrible cash advance fees. The rates are high. And I remember at the time, that was really when I was working that job, which was many years ago. That was really when the seeds for the network began to take root, because I just thought, in fact, when I left that job, I went and worked for a company, a nonprofit, like more of a nonprofit that helps people get out of debt, because I felt like terrible about it. It just wasn't, it was my first like young job there. And I just thought it's just, you're kind of preying on people when they need something. And then I would sit in these boardrooms, because I was a vice president, where they were talking about how they could, squeeze more money out of people and how they could, do penalty pricing. And it was really not a very great, kind of way, I think, to make a living or to profit off of people. So it just got me to thinking about not only that, but how I've seen it in entertainment as well, where you have, you can see that a show is pushing a certain agenda. And I think we see it maybe, I think readers and viewers are more sophisticated now. So I think it's less blatant than it was maybe a few years ago. But, whether it's the controversy over vaccinating or not vaccinating. So you have a medical show that shows a kid that dies of measles because his mom didn't vaccinate him. And it's like, okay, you have to be so obviously pandering to your, right, to your sponsors. And so I think that all of those things were in my mind when I wrote The Network, which did focus more on the entertainment. So when I wanted to write the follow-up to it, again, I'm thinking, what are the issues that, because I like to take sort of a bit of a philosophy and tackling some of the issues from all sides and try not to push as the author, but just through the characters. And one of the big issues in the book is healthcare. So, I'm sure most of us are familiar with the fact where you have something wrong and the doctor wants an MRI and you need an act of Congress before your insurance company is willing to pay for those kinds of things, where you've got bureaucrats sitting in multi-million-dollar estates making life and death decisions that doctors should be making because they're worried about the bottom line. So that's one of the, I've got a CEO in the book who is the CEO of the insurance company. He's probably one of the most vile characters I've written, other than the main antagonist in this. And that's the story that Taylor's about. And then the other, which is quite coincidental, deals with this cold vaccine that's been rolled out and the question of, is this vaccine doing something to people? And this was written before COVID started or before, anything like that came out. I'm sure people are going to be looking at that now and thinking, oh, is that supposed to be? It is. It has nothing to do with that. But it's just looking at, how we are all influenced in so many different ways when we don't even realize it. And then again, tying in a little bit of that media manipulation, as you see, Taylor works for a network. She's a producer. So you see when her story comes out that it's edited in a certain way to push, again, the network's agenda as opposed to really telling the truth. So a little bit of the fake news component is in the book as well.
Okay. Now this is totally off topic, but you like to scuba dive. So is diving on a wrecked ship like spooky, or is it too interesting to be spooky?
Well, it's been a long time. I don't do it anymore. I did it many years ago, but it is spooky because it's usually deeper, number one. So you've got to keep an eye. I mean, we have dive computers, so that helps, but you've got to keep an eye on how long you're down. But also there are nooks and crannies that you have to be careful that that you're paying attention where you're going. If you're diving into a room, you don't want to get stuck somewhere or panic or something like that. So it is interesting, but I enjoy being more on an open reef better and looking at the fish. Yeah. But I never ran into any skeletons or anything like that on a wreck. So that was
okay. Unlike every diving movie we've ever seen.
Exactly. Yeah. Never had it.
Okay. Okay. Then we're going to move on to Samantha, is our last author tonight. Samantha is from the Bay Area, but now lives in New Orleans. Her new book, He Started It, which is one of the best titles ever. I just love that title. Explains why cross-country family trips can be a bit trying. When you're all keeping secrets and trying to forget a memory, a missing person, an act of revenge, the man in the black truck who won't stop following you, and especially when at least one of you is a killer and there's a body in the trunk. Sam loves Zapp's potato chips and homemade mocha. Half coffee, half hot chocolate, which used to be like a staple of mine when I worked in downtown Cleveland, and you'd had to go to work in, the middle of January, and you were freezing by the time you got there. So, Sam, tell us about your car trip, your road trip.
Yes, it is a trip with 3 adult siblings and 2 of their spouses who have to drive across the country, starting in Atlanta and going across the country to collect their grandfather's inheritance. And their mission is to scatter his ashes at the end of the trip. And it is a recreation of a trip they took when they were kids and their grandfather drove, which is why he's making them do it again. So the book has both road trips. It flashes back to the original 20 years ago to the current one that's happening in the current day. And along the way, there's lots of grudges and lots of scores to settle, and pretty much sibling rivalry amped up a few thousand degrees.
Oh yeah, sounds awkward. Can you read some of the book to us? Can you?
Yeah. I'm going to read the beginning, and it starts 14 days left. You want a heroine, someone to root for, to identify with. She can't be perfect though, because that'll just make you feel bad about yourself. A flawed heroine then, someone who may break the rules to protect her family, but doesn't kill anyone unless it's self-defense. Not murder though, at least not the cold-blooded kind. That's the first deal breaker. The second is cheating. Men can get away with that and still be the hero, but a cheating wife is unforgivable, which means I can't be your heroine. I still have a story to tell. It begins in a car, rather an SUV. We sit according to our rank, the oldest in the driver's seat. That's Eddie. His wife sits next to him, but I'll get to her. The middle seat is for the middle child, and that's me, Beth. I'm 2 years younger than Eddie, and he never lets me forget it. My husband sits next to me, again, later for that, because our spouses weren't supposed to be here. One seat left, way in the back, and that's Portia, the surprise baby. She's 6 years younger than me, and sometimes it feels like 100. With no spouse or significant other, she has the whole seat to herself. In the very back, our luggage, stacked side by side in a neat single row because that's the only way it fits. I told Eddie that the first time. Our handbags and computer bags go on top of the roller bags. You don't have to be a flight attendant to figure that out. Under the bags, there's the trunk compartment. One side has the spare tire, in the other, a locked wooden box with brass fittings. This special little box in this special little place, all by itself with nothing else around, is to hold our grandfather. He's been cremated. Now, I'll stop there.
Wow. So what gave you the idea for this book? What inspired this?
It actually started when a friend of mine was telling me about her road trip when a lot of things went wrong, and they had a flat tire, and they had someone got sick. They had to stop at an urgent care. And the more I listened to it, the more I just thought this is such a great idea for a thriller, for just to take the concept of a road trip and to build on that, except what goes wrong in this trip is more deadly than the flat tire. I started with that idea, and then the idea of siblings, because putting adult siblings in a car together, I don't know how you are with your siblings, but if I get around my brother, I am 12 years old all over again. And we act like we are 12, and we would never last on a 2-week road trip. We would kill each other in a weekend. I mean, it would be over. So someone's getting left on the side of the road. So I just thought sibling rivalry would be perfect, because it's a pressure cooker environment. You're stuck in a car together, and the spouses are there. Everybody has secrets. There's secrets going on in the car because they're texting each other. So even within the car, within these 5 people, there are secrets going back and forth. So there's a lot going on just in the travel across the country.
Wow. I just a little off topic. I just binge watched the first season of The Haunting of Hill House from Netflix. I had to get the disc from the library, but that's what was most astounding about that to me. Was it was like 5 siblings, and you saw them as adults, and then you went back and saw them as children, and then you came back to them as adults, and you're like, oh, that explains a lot, And you're right, your siblings, because I have siblings too, and we're very close. It's like no one can make you crazier, but there's pretty much no one in the world practically that you love more, except maybe your own children. So it's such a tight relationship. But
what I found really interesting is I'm an only child. So for me, it's all totally new dynamics. I've watched it in my own kids or in my husband's family, but I don't get it. And so I make major faux pas with my in-laws, like with the brother-in-laws and stuff all the time, because I don't quite get the dynamic.
The thing with siblings that's so interesting is that you grow up together and you're together during your formative years and you experience fundamentally the same thing. If you live in the house together, you have the same parents, you have the same experiences, you have the same major memories, and you can never recreate that. You can be married for 50 years, but it's not during your formative years. So
and do you remember the memories differently though? I think my kids
probably sure
totally differently.
Yeah, I'm sure everybody remembers things differently, but you have the same, you speak the same language because you were in that house together. You have a shorthand way of speaking because you were both there, or you were all there, however many there are.
You have so much in common, but you're so different too at the same time.
My daughter's one comment that drove it home for me was, she said, "Mom, you cannot understand. I mean, what was it like when you were a lonely child?" Okay.
And you were like, "It was great. I didn't have to share anything."
Right.
And birth, in my theory is, I don't have any children, but my theory is birth order is so astounding because I have 4 sets of nephews and nieces, and like it's pretty much 3 each. And whatever the first one is like, the second one will be the total opposite. You know, if the first one's, you know, straight A's, the second one will struggle in school. It doesn't, gender doesn't matter, particular age doesn't matter. It's like whatever the first one is, the second will be the opposite. And the third one is usually the most unique of the 3 because somehow they manage to be completely unlike the first 2, but not in the middle. You know? I don't know if you guys find that, but that I found. It's like, yes. But back to the books. As every writer discovers, you found that writing the first book, when you have all the time in the world and no pressure, and writing the second with a contract and a deadline are 2 like totally different situations. So how did you cope with writing the second one?
Yeah, I had been writing for about 20 years, and my first book, My Lovely Wife, was the 12th book that I had written. So I had a system down, or so I thought, and I don't outline and I don't plot, and I just sit down and I write. And my editor asked me for a synopsis of my second book. And I didn't even know what a synopsis was. I had to Google it. And then I had to figure out so I had never written that way before. So I made some stuff up and I wrote a synopsis, and we worked on it a little and fine-tuned it. And she said, "Okay, go write this book." And I did, and it was terrible. It was the most predictable thriller you ever could have. It was terrible. We threw the entire book out, the entire idea out, everything gone. And she said, "Go back to doing what you're doing before, and you have 3 months to write me a new book." And I did. And so that I had a 3-month deadline, and he started it. So basically I wrote an entire book in between that was completely fresh. Yeah. And now we don't do outlines anymore. We don't talk about outlines or synopsis or anything.
Well, I do plot and I do outline, but I had the exact same experience. My second, what would have been my second published book, we wound up totally throwing out and has never been published. And I had to write something totally different and like as fast as I possibly could. So yeah, it's not fun. Not fun.
No, but it happens, and everything is, I throw out far more than what gets published even now. I'm constantly starting and stopping books. Like I said, I must have started during the shutdown pandemic. I must have started 5 books that I completely trashed because I didn't like the idea of it. And either the idea takes off or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then it just becomes part. But it's all practice, and it's all still useful as a writer.
True. So tell us one thing that no one would guess about living in New Orleans.
I'm not in New Orleans. I'm on hurricane evacuation right now, so I'm sitting in a hotel room because there's a storm. So the one thing to know about New Orleans is that sometimes you have to pick up and leave immediately, and you better have a place to go, and you better have a way to get there. And you have to work it into your expenses, your yearly expenses, how much you're going to have to spend on evacuating. So that's definitely, if you're going to live anywhere on the Gulf Coast, you have to know that about it.
Oh, well, I'm by Fort Myers, so yeah, I know.
Exactly.
So I
hurricanes.
have a question for all of the authors. I'd
Okay.
like to know what you have coming next, what you're working on now, and
Great
how
question.
productive you're being in this time of COVID. So anyone can jump in.
All right, I'm being very productive. Not with writing though, not lately. I've been doing all kinds of repairs around the house. I've revamped my entire life this year. I've got every project I wanted to get done at home. I got it done.
My wife would love you.
Ah.
We've all been through that. Yeah, no, it's so I've used COVID well for that. The problem is, and I'm sure everybody else here is going to identify with this. As a writer, I'm the guy that's always working at home. So now all of my friends who are not going to offices think, hey, we'll drop by and see Rob because he never does anything anyways. He's just drunk by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We'll go there for drinks and sit outside. So that's the one problem as a writer I found during the lockdown is that I have less time for the writing, and that all my friends who don't have anything to do now, are making the social rounds, and they drop by my place. So anybody else finding that? Do people just assume because you work at home you're always available for the phone call or for
I don't have that many friends intentionally, so that's not a problem for me.
Mine have all died, so I understand.
I guess, yeah, that's what you said.
Oh. I still have a day job, so yeah, that doesn't really apply to me either.
Yeah, no. I mean, I have my kids home, but they're college age, they're home now. And so they sort of are getting it now, because if I try to interrupt them, they'll be like, Mom, just because I'm home, I have a class. I'm like, oh, okay, now you understand when you were knocking on the door, that I was home but working. But so my sister and I are working on book 5 for under the Liv Constantine, and we have our 4th book coming out in July that we finished during COVID. And then we have a short story coming out, which is a prequel to The Last Mrs. Parrish that we're really excited about with Audible. It's an Audible original that we wrote, and it's kind of Amber's origin story. So Amber Oliver, who was the antagonist in The Last Mrs. Parrish. So that hopefully will be out. I don't have a release date yet, but we're hoping by the end of the year. Yeah.
So Lynn, how do you work with somebody else? How do you write a book with another human being? I have a hard enough time doing it by myself.
Yeah, me too.
Well, I write with my sister. We're talking about siblings before, so fortunately we get along very well. We don't.
And that's what I have friends I get along with and people I love. I don't want them anywhere near my work.
We have very similar sensibilities and senses of humor, and so we definitely talk a lot and brainstorm a lot before we start. So we're in agreement on a premise and an idea. And we have found our process that actually it's evolved over the 5-6 books that we've written. And it's become easier in a way. And it's actually harder now for me to write solo because I'm so used to this brainstorming process where we'll talk about it. We'll go through 3, 4, 5 iterations, and then we'll say, oh yeah, that's so much better. Well, what if this, what if that? So a lot of people say, well, what if you disagree, or what if you don't, and we don't disagree all that often, but actually even when we do, it's really helpful to the story because it just makes us talk about it more. And we always go kind of back to character. What would the character do? And who is this character? And it helps us a lot. And plus, you only have to write half as much, which is very nice. So, and if you get bored,
you spend all your time rewriting. But you don't spend your time writing what somebody else did, though. I think that'd be the natural inclination too. Well, I can do this better, or this should be said this way. Do you argue over like which adverb we're going to be using this Thursday, or?
No, we send it to each other. No, we'll send our work and we'll say, feel free to edit, feel free, and we're both very comfortable sharing first draft with each other because there's no criticism. So I'm thrilled if Val edits my work and it comes back, and she's the same way. And if we'll say, hey. Sometimes we'll do it in red or we'll do it in track changes. and we'll send it back, and we don't get offended at all with each other. It's actually really helpful. So, I mean, I don't know if I could do that with everybody, and I've known other writing teams where they'll say, oh, I'll tell her this is terrible, or this is, and we're very polite, even though we're very close. You know, we are diplomatic, and it's never like, oh, what the hell is this? You know, it's sort of like, oh, you don't mind if I take a shot? That's sort of like, and we're like, yeah, okay, go ahead and do it. So,
Robert, Desidario, are you working on another novel? You said you wrote this one just because you couldn't figure out what it was. So you are, right?
Yeah, I am. I started writing a sequel to The Occurrence, which I will get to, but the one I'm working on now, I mean, I said before, I'm fascinated by reincarnation and past lives, and I looked at what genre would I not have to explain to anybody that I could just drop a story into and people would totally get that you could go back 500,000 years. And what I thought is the vampire genre. I'm not into vampires, but this has become an amazing avenue for me to explore a journey of these characters who realize that they've been connected through time. Two of them happen to be vampires. One's a bad one, one's a good one. That's a simple way of saying it. But it's become, for me, a gut-wrenching story of this guy who loses everything. And the vampire who's trying to reclaim his soul. And he's had a history of trying to find ways where he can get his soul back because there's a spark of humanity left in him. So that fascinated me as a world within which I could totally explore people being connected through centuries, and also the arc of a soul, which is what The Occurrence is about. You know, I believe the arc of a soul goes through many incarnations. Not all of them are good ones. There's a lot of evil that I think the human soul has been through in order to become good, to find the good. So the genre of vampires has all of a sudden become a pivotal point within which I can explore this story, which is, while it's about vampires, it's really not. It's about humanity, and it's about
Mary says that sounds like a great story, a vampire wanting to get his soul back. Question from Claire Van Blaricum. Is that, I probably butchered that. Are any of you planning books using the pandemic as a background or in any way in the plot? Are you going to address it as you go forward?
I'm definitely not. I want nothing to do with the pandemic. I can't wait for it to be over, and I don't memorialize it, write about it, read about it. Not at all.
Mm.
Well, this is something we've all struggled with. I don't know. We've all spoken to our editors. The book that I just pubbed in August, Under Pressure, page 1, I mentioned the COVID lockdown. It's where one of my characters perfected her alcoholism. She said, you know, during all those months of COVID lockdown, she could work on drinking by herself. And then further on in the book, I had last edits on March 9th, and I remember seeing when the disease had gone from 111 cases to 204 cases overnight in China. I still have that screenshot sometime in, I guess, January. And so I thought it might be around. I didn't mention it. And then when the book finally came back March 9th, I asked my editor, he said, no, leave all that stuff out. Nothing's going to date a book more than putting COVID in it. So I have 2 references. Anybody else struggle with that as far as, you know, what do we do going forward? Because you're ignoring a big cultural touchstone if we don't talk about it.
I've struggled with it. I don't think I think it's going to become one of those things that has to be mentioned.
Oh, I think she froze.
The hurricane. It's the hurricane.
Some point, because it's fine, and it's
Mm-hmm.
it's for us in New Orleans. We had Katrina, and Katrina, everybody's life in New Orleans is either before or after Katrina. That is literally how we refer to it. Before Katrina, I did this. After Katrina, I do this. All right. Before Katrina, I lived here. After Katrina, I lived here. COVID is going to be one of those things for a lot of people where they don't do the same thing afterwards. They've lost their business, or we have restaurants and bars that are closing for good every day in New Orleans. Yeah. So those people, their lives are going to change because of it. So I don't want to read about this period because I'm living through it. But the post-COVID world it's almost just going to have to be referenced in past, like before COVID, I did this or something, because I think to ignore it is to just and pretend it didn't exist. I think it's obviously just too big to do that. So I struggle with it. You don't want to read it about it if you go through it. That's something people will read about in 20 years from now. No one in New Orleans would read about Katrina, but people who did not experience it read about it. So if you've experienced it, you don't need to read through it because you were there. So it is, I definitely have struggled with it. In my third book, which is finished, which will be out next year, I had a line in it that referred to Ebola. And my editor said, should we change it to COVID? And because, see, it was a joke about somebody being infected. And, you know, I hope it's not Ebola. And so she said, should we change it to, I hope it's not COVID?
Probably should.
Those kind of things.
Always use syphilis. It's a big joke popper, that one.
Who?
I don't, when talking about this, I may end this vampire story somewhere with that. I just started to read Camus' The Plague today. I just said, I was in my other study and I was looking at the books and I said, oh my God, I have this. So I just started to read it. It's amazing. But I think we'll find a way to talk about it in the way that's pre and post, that it's the aftermath in a lot of ways, the effect that it's had on people. I think that's probably going to be the most, the one that determines how we go ahead. I mean, during the lockdown, I wrote 2 screenplays. I wrote 2 pilots. One of them references COVID because it's a pharmaceutical story. And it's about the search for the vaccine, and I'm not sure where that's going to go, but I knew that was an important part of it. But yeah, no, it's going to be a fascinating road ahead in terms of how to include that in the stories.
Casey, do you have a question? You said you have a question?
Well, it was regarding talking about like COVID, you know, in your works. This is just coming from a consumer, not necessarily a writer. I have to say, quarantine art is probably my least favorite genre. I'm an actor, so right now everything, it's like film series about living in quarantine. Like, ma'am, I know what it's like to live in quarantine. I don't want to watch it. But also, you know, if you're gonna, as a writer, include in your book being a major plot point, we don't know how this ends. This is the now. So yeah, this is, like I said, talking about Katrina, this is such a turning point in history. However, it's not history yet. So, you know, it's like, maybe we should wait a little bit and see if we're all still here in a few years to be writing about the pandemic. So that's just my take.
Yeah, how do you incorporate it in the plot when we don't know how it ends yet?
That's what scares me, that we're going to all look back on this sometime and think of it as the good old days. I remember the good old days when we were terrified of our groceries and we didn't want to talk to anybody, and we had a chain, and there was a chain around our house. I mean, I wonder how fiction, like who could read The Postman now? I mean, Cormac McCarthy probably hasn't sold a book in the past 6 months because, you know, it's true. I think it's all Herman joke books is the only thing that's probably selling to a certain demographic. I think people want to be cheered up and not reminded of this. That's what I find a little bit. I'm curious what kind of position it's going to hold in the future, you know?
But also, I think, like, as artists, you know, writers, actors, what do we do more than use our trauma to fuel our art? Right. And it's like, let's just sit with it. And because, like, this is reality, you know, this is not a play. Maybe not turn this traumatic experience yet into something. Because to me, it's a form of escapism. I had to write a monologue once for a project, and I actually used a very current, relevant, painful thing that was going on in my life. And I'm like, you are a sick person, Casey Boyd. You are a sick human being to use this real issue in your life as a monologue. So,
well, what's interesting about that too is that I wrote something years and years ago after a really traumatic experience, and I had an editor send it back and say, sit on this for 3 years and then rewrite it and send it in. You're too close to this to write this at this moment. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I guess it was too much pain or something bleeding on those pages. And in retrospect, I think it was good advice, but so.
Well, Hemingway touched on both those things. He said, first, writing is simple. All you do is sit down at the keyboard and bleed. You know, and he also said, good writers borrow and great writers steal. So, I mean, I didn't realize that this was even discussed anymore. I sit in front of my computer every day. It's therapy. It's all my mental anguish and neuroses coming out, and I'm trying to fix it with characters and trying to kill bad guys with it and trying to make good guys stronger with it. And I mean, that's
how's that going for you, Robert?
My therapy bills are down, I'll tell you that much. You know, my dog gets lots of walks, you know, and I get a lot of hate mail. So I think the whole cycle's working for me.
Yeah, as long as the dog's happy, that's really the most important thing.
It's the hate mail. As long as the hate mail's coming in, I know people are reading the books. That's what I like.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Don Ias says, someone pointed out to me that an entire season of Friends happened during 9/11 and did not enter into the story at all. So I think that's kind of probably true. I don't remember ever hearing anything on Friends.
Yeah, but the next question
Friends was not about real life. Like,
but I think part of what's going to happen, I think, you know, the question becomes, I was talking to Stephen James, another writer, and he was saying he had somebody shaking hands in his book and he got rid of it. I mean, I think it's the subtleties as well going forward. What's it going to be like when we're writing crowd scenes? Are we going to be writing stories where people are gathering in huge groups? Are you going to be able to hug people, shake hands, you know, all of that? Are we ever
blow out candles on a birthday cake?
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, you know, I mean, so I think, you know, even not coming out and overtly talking about the pandemic, it is, again, as we said, in a post-COVID world, how much is going to change permanently, or you know, I mean, the Spanish flu, like that eventually went away, right? People went back to living normally. So are we going to be doing the same thing? I don't know.
Look at movie theaters and look at bars and beaches. People are dying to ignore this. Eventually, when it gets safe enough, everyone's going to forget about it. That's what I think is coming. I hate to say that.
No, but I think so too. I don't think it's in human nature to treat other people like they're a weapon, which is the way we are. We're looking at people like, oh my gosh, don't get anywhere near to me. And it's so counterintuitive to the human experience. You want to be able to, and I mean, I know even from, like, I live near the beach and we do a lot of things outside, and forget it, 2 or 3 drinks later, everybody's got their arms around each other, and it's like, you know, you just,
I love you, man.
there's no 6 feet. Yeah, so.
Yeah. Well, I think like any artistic endeavor, you have to do what feels right to you. You have to do what works for you, you know?
Exactly.
See, and I would say, as someone who writes domestic thrillers, I'm wondering how many bodies are buried in backyards right now. What happened during lockdown that we don't know about?
Right, or how many, you know, relationships that were on, people that were meeting that shouldn't have been meeting, and then they can't meet, like, right? How's all that going? Stuff going on behind marriages, right?
We have a guy who writes Mystery Minute for Rogue Women Writers, and he wrote one that I read one time that was about how it has affected murder scenes in the mystery. I mean, you can't get close enough to a person to strangle them or stab them anymore because you might get COVID from them. So how does a serial killer kill and protect themselves from getting COVID?
I'm thinking that they might be risky enough to go ahead and not worry about that.
Yeah,
probably.
I would think if you're killing somebody,
Yeah.
you know, like, social distancing is not your priority right at that moment.
Keep that mask on. Just keep the mask on. Don't let the blood hit you.
You know, you got to get out the 5X suit and you're good.
Well, this was great.
This was very
Thank you.
fun. I think we're pretty much out of time, so we should probably wrap it up.
Thank you.
I am going to put this recording on Facebook, so I will send all of you the link and you can share it with all your people and tell them we're sorry we couldn't do it live.
I don't have any people. Is that okay?
Well, you got all the
That's my line. That's my line.
So, yeah.
I don't.
Then send it to total strangers. That's okay too.
Oh, they're used to that. That I can do.
Thank you
Nice
all.
meeting
Thank you.
everybody.
Well, thank you so much. So nice
Thank
meeting you.
Thank you.
Bye,
Very
Dawn.
nice.
Okay.
Bye.